Lord, you are the God who saves me. Day and night I cry out to you. May my prayer come before you. Turn your ear to my cry. I am overwhelmed with troubles, and my life draws near to death. I am counted among those who go down to the pit. I am like one without strength. I am set apart with the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, who are cut off from your care. You have put me in the lowest pit, in the darkest depths. Your wrath lies heavily on me, and you have overwhelmed me with all the waves. You've taken from me my closest friends, and have made me repulsive to them. I am confined and cannot escape. My eyes are dim with grief. I call to you, Lord, every day. I spread out my hands to you. Do you show your wonders to the dead? Do their spirits rise up and praise you? Is your love declared in the grave, your faithfulness in destruction? Are your wonders known in the place of darkness, or your righteous deeds in the land of oblivion? But I cry to you for help, Lord. In the morning my prayer comes before you. Why, Lord, do you reject me and hide your face from me? From my youth I have suffered and been close to death. I have borne your terrors and am in despair. Your wrath has swept over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. All day long they surround me like a flood. They have completely engulfed me. You have taken from me friend and neighbor. Darkness is my closest friend. The word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God.
1 through 22. I don't want to read this. I don't. This story is violent. This story is painful. The story exposes evil in the world. I wish it were not in the Bible. I wish we could just read about the love of Jesus all day long. If we don't read these stories, however, and others like it, we lose the full witness of the scriptures that are absolutely relevant for each and every one of us here today. Because survivors, victims need to know that they are not alone. They need to know that even the scriptures reveal the evil that is experienced in the world. That these stories are not the end of the story, but that they exist and they need to be named. So while we don't want to read these stories, I don't want to read this story, we need to. Second Samuel 13. Some time passed. David's son Absalom had a beautiful sister whose name was Tamar. And David's son Amnon fell in love with her. Amnon was so tormented that he made himself ill because of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible to Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of David's brother Shimea, and Jonadab was a very crafty man. He said to him, "O son of the king, why are you so haggard morning after morning? Will you not tell me?" Amnon said to him, "I love Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister." Jonadab said to him, "Lie, and when your father comes to see you, say to him, 'Let my sister Tamar come and give me something to eat and prepare the food in my sight so that I may see it and eat it from her hand.'" So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. And when the king came to see him, Amnon said to the king, "Please let my sister Tamar come and make a couple of cakes in my sight so that I may eat from her hand." Then David sent home to Tamar, saying, "Go to your brother Amnon's house and prepare food for him." So Tamar went to her brother Amnon's house, where he was lying down. She took dough, kneaded it, made cakes in his sight, and baked the cakes. Then she took the pan and set them out before him, but he refused to eat. Amnon said, "Send out everyone from me." So everyone went out from him. Then Amnon said to Tamar, "Bring the food into the chamber so that I may eat from your hand." So Tamar took the cakes she had made and brought them into the chamber to Amnon her brother. But when she brought them near him to eat, he took hold of her and said to her, "Come, lie down with me, my sister." She answered him, "No, my brother, do not force me. For such a thing is not done in Israel. Do not do anything so vile. As for me, where could I carry my shame? And as for you, you would be as one of the scoundrels in Israel. Now therefore, I beg you, speak to the king, for he will not withhold me from you." But he would not listen to her, and being stronger than she, he forced her and lay with her. Then Amnon was seized with a very great loathing for her. Indeed, his loathing was even greater than the lust he had just felt for her. Amnon said to her, "Get out." But she said to him, "No, my brother, for this is wrong in sending me away. This wrong is greater than the other that you did to me." But he would not listen to her. He called the young man who served him and said, "Put this woman out of my presence and bolt the door after her." Now she was wearing a long robe with sleeves, for this is how the virgin daughters of the king were clothed in earlier times. So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. But Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the long robe that she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, crying aloud as she went. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has Amnon your brother been with you? Be quiet, for now my sister, he is your brother. Do not take this to heart." So Tamar remained a desolate woman in her brother Absalom's house. When King David heard of all these things, he became very angry, but he would not punish his son Amnon because he loved him, for he was his firstborn. But Absalom spoke to Amnon, neither good or bad, for Absalom hated Amnon because he had raped his sister Tamar.
I know that I don't need to explain to any of you that this is a difficult and painful subject. Sexual abuse is something that we would rather not know about or talk about or think about. But the fact that the story of Tamar remains in the biblical canon is powerful. I believe it is an invitation to us to name and confront the horror of sexual abuse. According to Webster, sexual abuse is the infliction of sexual contact upon a person by forcible compulsion. Sexual abuse happens when one person with more power, due to age, gender, mental capacity, position, social position, invites or forces someone with less power to engage in a sexual experience. It is also abusive if the person with more power accepts an invitation from the person with less. It is expected that the person in power should know. Sexual abuse includes any unwanted sexual contact. Sometimes it is wanted sexual contact. And it does not have to include touching. It can be visual, it can be verbal, as well as being physical. It is estimated that 1 in 3 females and 1 in 5 males experience some sort of inappropriate sexual experience before the age of 18. Date rape is a common problem on college campuses and elsewhere. Babysitters, uncles, fathers, aunts, brothers, cousins, teachers, priests, pastors, employers perpetrate sexual abuse every day. And it really is no wonder. Our sexuality is a powerful part of who we are as people. And we in America are exposed to the sexualization of everything. Sex is used to sell deodorant. It's used to sell cars, motorcycles, tools, clothing, makeup. The list is endless. We are inundated with images that are far beyond innuendo. And those images largely exploit women's bodies and women's sexuality. If you pay attention to advertising, you may notice the men are playing golf or tossing a football, the boys are shooting baskets or climbing trees, and the little girls are looking pretty. And pretty changes to sexy pretty quickly, at a pretty young age. Our false sense of beauty and our obsession with just the body distorts our priorities. Imagine if all the money that's spent on beauty products was spent to feed the 1 in 5 families in Kansas who are food insecure. This focus in our culture on looks and sensuality and continually putting women in compromising positions, exploiting bodies to sell products, certainly impacts the number of rapes and sexual assaults. It impacts the number of women in leadership positions. But sexual abuse was happening long before anyone had heard of a television. Let's look a bit further into the story of Tamar. She's beautiful and therefore an object of desire. She is obedient, subject to doing what she's told. I wonder if she had any inkling of what was about to transpire. Not that it would have made any difference. Tamar was property. She was property of her father and of her brothers, and after the rape, she begged Amnon to marry her so that she would not be put to shame. The practice of victims of rape having their best choice be to marry the perpetrator of their abuse was common well into the 1800s, and it wouldn't surprise me if it still happens today. Because that way, the woman would not have to live with the shame that they had caused. That way, they would still have a man to take care of them. And we shake our heads and wonder how such thinking came to be. But in our 21st century, we are only now listening to women who are violated, and we still question their motives. Women carry enough shame and responsibility for their having been assaulted. It is a very rare occasion that it is made up. And we have to get past our thinking that sex is really what women want or women need. Jokes about rape and incest, encouragement to sneak a feel, to look only at outer beauty. These are things that should not be tolerated. And I can't give this sermon without mentioning the multi-billion-dollar pornography business. I hope that all of you, especially those of you that are young and just curious about human bodies and how babies are born, understand that there is nothing real in the images and the pictures on the internet. Ask your parents, ask your grandparents, ask me, but don't rely on pornography for your information. And for those of you that are struggling with an addiction, because statistically you exist in this room, know that pornography is as physiologically addictive as heroin or methamphetamine or alcohol. The chemicals that are released in your brain when you are looking at pornographic images are as powerful as those released when you are taking drugs. So get help. It's a physiological thing. It's not just a be tough enough to beat it thing. Sometimes it just takes more help. As Derek and Diane have pointed out in this Bible and the Body sermon series, it's not a topic we often discuss in church. I was asked to take on this ugly stuff, and I'm going to leave it up to them to wrap everything up and explain to us next week what healthy sexuality looks like. I am really looking forward to that. I sometimes think that God had just a little bit too much faith in humankind to give us a gift that is so incredibly powerful, that can be so beautiful beyond words in the right circumstances, and be so incredibly destructive and damaging. I'm not sure why God thought we could handle that. Some of you may remember that 24 years ago, I stood in this same place and I talked with you about sexual abuse. In researching for today, I found the cassette tape. Kids, you can ask your parents what those are. I found the cassette tape and I listened to my message, and I was pleasantly surprised. I shared a lot that day about how the church has perpetuated abuse by perpetuating patriarchy, by insisting on using only male images for God. Maybe I didn't mention that, but I was and certainly am still thinking it. And for asking victims to keep silent in order to preserve the good name of the church community. I faulted the church for being so quiet about the subject of sexuality that a counterculture has developed, a counterculture of tolerance and boys will be boys, coupled with this message to only have sex within certain parameters, leaving us ashamed of our bodies and our desires. I pray for the church to be a counterculture, pronouncing and living sexual health. Again, Derek and Diane will explain that to you next week. I also talked that day about the importance of telling the truth, of naming abuse for what it is, so that healing and wholeness, even forgiveness, can happen. That day, 24 years ago, Bernie introduced me as a professional, as a school counselor, and also as having attended a workshop on sexual abuse held by Mennonite Central Committee in April of '94. What she didn't mention that day, nor did I, is that I have my own story of sexual abuse. I chose not to share it that day, thinking somehow that I would be better heard if I didn't make it personal. But today I'm choosing to tell you my story. When I was 8, I was touched inappropriately, sexually, on a number of different occasions by an older teenage boy. He said all the things that perpetrators say. Don't tell anyone, you'll be in trouble, people will be mad at you, people will think you're dirty. This is our little secret. And after a number of incidences over a time period, I would guess, of about 6 months, there was an attempted intercourse. And it must have scared him as much as me because he never tried it again. I was also figuring out how to not ever be alone with him. As a little girl, I was really confused. I didn't like the touch. I knew it was sinful. There was part of me that liked the attention. I don't remember much physiological sexual response, but there probably was some. I have learned since that bodies respond to sexual stimulation whether or not you want them to. Men can be raped, cannot always control that physiological response no matter what their mind is telling them, the body takes over. I do remember being terrified, probably for way more than 9 months that I was pregnant. And I remember incredible shame. Mom remembers that I started eating then and never really quit. It's a fairly normal response. Later on, depression set in my whole freshman year in high school. This is 4 or 5 years later after the abuse. That whole freshman year, I tried my best not to smile because I didn't think I deserved to be happy. I wasn't always very good at that not smiling thing, but I did try. And I clung to God at that time, not for hope, not for help, but to try to absolve myself of my incredible guilt. For a while, I thought I should be a prostitute, that I could fulfill this deep need that men had and have an important purpose in doing so. I also thought that was just really all I was worth. I didn't tell a single soul. When I was a senior in high school, a woman came to teach in Moundridge. She targeted another girl first, but I was kind of the go-to fix-it person. And so that girl came to me saying, I don't know what to do. This teacher is saying and doing really confusing things. And I said, oh, I'm supposed to go take a picture of her anyway for the school paper. I'll talk to her about it. Well, she must have picked up on my vulnerability immediately because I was now the new target. My friend and I have joked about how it could have been her paying for therapy all these years. She should be grateful that I rescued her, and she is sorry that I have suffered. Anyway, this teacher was very manipulative. She first touched my breast through my shirt with a puppet. I had no idea what was happening, and I couldn't stand the thought of someone thinking that I didn't like them. And she knew really well how to exploit that. It was a long year. I blocked most of it out. After graduation from high school, I moved to Wichita with her, and I spent the next 5 years under her control in many ways. She told me what to eat and what to wear and what my political party and religious affiliation should be. This is the Reader's Digest version, so I'll spare you the details. But let's suffice it to say that it was an emotionally, mentally, spiritually, sexually abusive situation. I did attend college during that time, 5 years at Wichita State University. Incidentally, we moved right into the heart of 1980s BTK territory in Wichita, and our washer and dryer were in an unlocked basement. But I could talk myself out of being afraid by recognizing that I would be too ugly for him to want to do anything with me anyway. During this time, Mom talked with a man who deprogrammed people from cults, and he said it would be better for me to leave on my own. If you feel compassion for me today, feel compassion also for Mom and Dad and what I put them through, or what they were put through. I didn't put them through it. It's hard to remember that sometimes. A successful student teaching experience gave me the confidence that I needed to leave, and I packed my stuff when she was gone one day, and I left a note, and I escaped. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever done, and it wasn't even close to being over. As you know, after teaching out west and working in Topeka, I moved home, and I married Bob. As is typical for sexual abuse survivors, our engagement and our wedding and our early marriage were a battle inside of me between emotional terror and intellectual knowing that I was with a good man in a good place and happy to be there. Then in 1993, I gave birth to a beautiful little girl. And when I tried to breastfeed her, the memories, the flashbacks, the feelings of those experiences of abuse, both from when I was little and when I was older, were relentless. So I did what any reasonable person wanting to avoid pain would do. I put her on the bottle. That bought me a year, but I still knew that something was wrong with me sexually. I didn't know why. I'd never been abused. A year later, I went to that MCC conference that I mentioned earlier. I still didn't name my experience as abuse, but I was ready to find help. In a way, I was forced to find help because I could no longer push away the pain and the shame and all the horrible things I was feeling and get out of bed in the morning and function as a parent and a wife and an employee and all those things I was committed to at the time. I started therapy and with some guidance recognized that if what had happened to me in both of those incidences, both as a senior and as a little girl, had happened to Mary, there's no doubt in my mind what that was. It was abuse. That was probably the most painful moment of my life. Because if it wasn't my fault, I had no idea who I was. For 20 years, I had buried this shame. I had believed these false premises. And with them gone, I was nothing. I was lost. So because I had promised I would, I wrote the musical for the 1995 Eden Centennial, even though I'd really lost all desire to do so. It was a very helpful thing to have to do at that time. The road to recovery is long. The damage to marriage and sexuality is not easily overcome. Bob has been patient beyond measure. I spent an additional 7 months in therapy with each subsequent pregnancy, refusing to give up the gift of being able to breastfeed my children. And I have worked to reclaim the gift of a healthy marriage relationship. In terms of struggles and depression, I can't really discern completely what is from the abuse and what just is. It's now been 24 years. It took a good 15 of those to restore my sense of self, to restore my sense of God and my faith in God. Some of those years were better than others. I would not give up my choice to name the truth and to struggle through and let it set me free. Had I not, I don't think I'd be standing here today. I know I wouldn't be standing right here. I pray to be part of a world where sexuality is seen as a gift and not something to exploit. I pray for victims and perpetrators of sexual abuse, knowing that probably 80% of people who abuse were abused as children. I pray for those who hurt and have been hurt, if not by physical touch, then by this incredibly warped sense of sexuality and exploitation in our culture. 24 years ago when I spoke to you, it was one of a number of sermons I gave on sexual abuse. For a time, I was on the Western District Conference Speakers Bureau. I've introduced myself in several small circles as the sole sexual abuse survivor at Eden. I know that's not true, but Eden was the only place where no one disclosed that this was also their story. If that's because I didn't share my own story at that time and you've suffered another 24 years in silence, I am sorry beyond words. But it isn't too late. Whatever your truth is, victim, perpetrator, both, speak it. If you are addicted and afraid, speak it. If you're just crass and think it's time to change, speak it. I hope that we are a community that can embrace and hold each other, say ugly things, and still believe that in the end, love wins and God embraces and redeems and transforms us all. God's desire for us is healing and restoration and wholeness. And I hope that we can be a community where God's work is done.